Hello everybody and welcome. Welcome to this venue. We were meant to be in another venue and we'll talk about that shortly, but this is the first podcast. We often have interesting people talking and people have said to me, why don't you record them and turn them into podcasts? And I said, sure, we'll do it, but we'd want to have a very interesting person to start with, and today we have John Waters. The question we will ask will be about you running for election as a member of the European Parliament. But before you answer that, John, we'll just discuss the cancellation. So we were meant to be in another gig and they found out about the event and they didn't like the sound of you lot. Right? And so they panicked and they cancelled it, and luckily this venue welcomed us. So I suppose the question, John, is what's your experience with cancel culture? Does it happen to you a lot? And what's your general response to it?
It happens to me a lot, yeah, it's happened to me. I mean, I've been cancelled for a decade or so, pretty much. That's just on the macro level. At the micro level, I've been cancelled umpteen times, in the sense that gigs like this, it got to the stage where I would have to meet my audience at a roundabout, and we'd then go in convoy to the venue, which wouldn't have been announced, and then we'd have the gig like this, and then go home afterwards. So that's the last week I was in Waterford, down the Archbishop's Palace, or the Bishop's Palace, and that was the first time in 4 years that I've actually been able to partially advertise something that I was involved in, and to go to it without actually having to do all that stuff, to go through that rigmarole. And I think it was mainly because the weather was so bad that night that the slime couldn't come out because it'd be washed away, you know. But to get serious about this, cancel culture, you see, it's misunderstood and a lot of these things are misunderstood in the context that people think it's kind of blue-haired monsters that are doing all this stuff, and that's where it stops. That's all just crazy. That's not what it is. This arises because you basically have a criminal government who want this to happen. This is what they want in order to protect themselves. Because essentially we're living under a continuing coup, which has been going on since 2011. And they want to ensure that they hold that. They basically have an arrangement that essentially, what people now call the Uni Party will stay in power, and that nothing will change for the foreseeable future, or at all, in that. So that means that Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, although they're beginning to get wobbly about things now, Labour, if they had any seats, and the others as well. The others are just kind of guerrilla, military kind of wing type of thing, the people before profit and all that. But essentially what this is about, this has been going on for, I remember the 2020 campaign, like Antifa, so-called, Rintifa they're just local guys with masks who are just given a 20 spot a night to come out and cause trouble, and they working with the cops to put out meetings, to stop meetings and all that sort of stuff. And the government know about this, the Taoiseach knows about this, the Minister for Justice knows about this. They're very happy with it. So it would be under no illusion, cancel culture is not some facet of woke, so-called. Woke is actually not even what it seems to be. Woke is an instrument of this tyranny also. It's a software of the totalitarian impulse that we're now looking at.
Well, there you have it now. Well, actually, the last time we nearly got cancelled, it was somebody wrote in an email which was ignored by the manager, but then they followed up to the owners. They found the owners and wrote, and it was, as a concerned mother, I'm very concerned about the person booking the gig.
Yeah, the concern, they're always concerned, aren't they? Yeah, it's concern, yeah. You can't say, well, I'm a fascist, so I want to stop them people talking. So I'm concerned sounds much better, doesn't it?
A concerned mother, but she didn't come to the gig anyway. So the question is now, you're running for election. Why, for the love of God, are you doing that?
I have no idea. It's like a nightmare or a dream or something. I had absolutely resolved never to run after. I ran in the 2020 election here in Dundee, God help us, and I had absolutely resolved 100%. That was it. That was my political career over. And but there's some people down the west. I've been doing a meeting a bit like something like this in Sligo for the last 3.5 years, every month. And at that meeting, there's some people who got together and thought, you know, they're farmers and fishermen and turf cutters, all those, you know, terrorist entities, you know, that are out there, you know, the far right farmers, the far right fishermen, the far right, you know, turf cutters, you know,
the far right grandmothers.
And they said they came to me first, and they just said, "Would you do it?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And we had an argument about it, and they went away. And then they came back and said, "We've done some research, and your name is showing up surprisingly positively," which is surprising. And they said, would you consider it in that context? And I said, no. And so they went away, but then they came back again about a month ago and said, look, this referendum is coming up. We think it's going to be a no, and we think if it is, you've a really good chance of winning in Midlands Northwest on what we're picking up in our research. And I said, I don't believe you. I said, okay, well, come, let's talk about it on the 9th of March. And they rang me on the 9th of March and bullied me into doing it. So I agreed, I mean, because I knew they weren't going to stop annoying me. So, you know, because you actually don't have to register until 3 weeks before the vote. Can you imagine the torture they would put me through between now and, say, the 20th of May, you know, to persuade me to go? So I agreed to go. And, but seriously, I think it's important, you know, and having said all that, I mean, it's important that because, you know, you can easily, and I don't lack sympathy for those who say we shouldn't get involved in the political system, that it's completely corrupt, and that it isn't the answer, it's no kind of solution. And that we should really just construct a kind of a parallel society, and I'd love to be part of that. I'd love to do that. But my great fear is that in the world we're going into, that won't even be possible. That they're not going to let us do that. And that therefore the only hope we have is to confront them on their own territory and remove them from that territory and cleanse that territory completely. And I think that the vote, the no vote, in a small way, but in a very indicative way, told us that this is actually remotely possible. Because it really woke, I'll be honest and say, I thought we were going to win, but I thought we were going to win marginally. I had no idea we were going to hammer them like that. And that tells me that I was misinterpreting something really fundamental about this country in the last maybe up to 4 years, certainly 3 years anyway. That what we had been reading as people being asleep wasn't that at all. It very much relates to the previous discussion we've had about the cancel culture. It was people being afraid to speak. And it's what I call mutism, you know, that kind of sense of, you know, you no longer feel you can go out and speak openly to people, even people you know, even people in the pub, you know, that you have to be careful about it. Not just the words you say about certain topics, but about straying anywhere near those topics where you might just trip into one of them and next thing you're in the middle of a big ruck. And so, but I think what I kind of know, I noticed this actually when I was down in Dalkey that morning. It struck me when I was voting myself. And you know, you go to the table and you get the papers, and then you go over to the, whatever they call it, used to be called a polling booth, but it's not a booth anymore, it's just it's just a table. But it struck me, I was standing there with the pencil, and I thought, this is probably the freest place in Ireland right now. You can actually say what you like here on this piece of paper, even if only in a very sort of, with an X. Afterwards then I thought that's what it was, that people felt free for the first time in a long time to say something, and it allowed the ballot paper in this context allowed them something that ballot papers generally don't allow them to do, unless there's a really good independent, to actually say something that you can really stand over, you know, heart and soul. That it's, you know, that no was really like from the heart. I'm from the soul of Ireland, and both of them. And I mean, in fairness, I want to just make something like people are slagging off Dunleary, you know, on this. But actually, when you average out the two votes, it comes to 53.75 no, which isn't bad, you know. So, you know, I think fair dues to Dunleary as well on this occasion. So it was really a blanket no, pretty much.
Why is it though? Why is Southside Dublin different than the rest of Ireland?
Oh, that's a dangerous question to ask here. I could clear the room very quickly now. Yeah. Well, I can only say this on the basis of my coming up from the country and that, you know, that you know, there are certain attitudes on the south side of Dublin that you don't get in the country, or didn't for maybe quite recently. There's also RTEs on the south side of Dublin, that Montrose building, you know, what is it? Christian Morris calls it the Montrose list, you know, that they're the politicians who are allowed on air, you know, and there's the RTE canteen. But it's more, it's kind of, I think it is a West Brit thing. Fundamentally, I think it's you get, you know, that it's a certain condescension towards the rest of the country, a reaction against the rest of the country, and not everybody, of course, and of course nobody in this room at all. But you know, there is that very strong. I mean, I feel it very strongly. I mean, I felt it since 2020 very acutely, where we live, you know, which is just down the street really. That, you know, it was quite chilly even in the summertime, you know. I wrote 35 years ago in my book Driving at the Crossroads about Dublin 4, which I kind of mapped out as nothing to do with, or not precisely to do, or not entirely to do with the postal address Dublin 4, but being a much broader thing. And it's like that RTE is like the cheerleader of that mentality, and it has been constantly for years now leading a war against the nature of Ireland, the deep nature of Ireland, Ireland's sense of its soul, Ireland's sense of its history, Ireland's sense of its past, its struggle in history. You know, because, you know, you see this all the time whenever it came up in the last few years. You know, this question, like when the Queen of England came here in 2011, like there was this almost orgy of, you know, self-flagellation, as if, you know, we had been invading them and, you know, torturing them and stealing their language and starving them to death or something. Like, there was almost that vibe, and that's something. It's a post-colonial thing, really, fundamentally. But the further you get from Dublin, the weaker it becomes. You know, if you go to Connacht, where I come from, it's virtually non-existent, or used to be, except now Galway is a bit infected with it as well. It's very complex, and in fact, people will have heard of this book, The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, which was written back in the late 50s by this psychiatrist called Frantz Fanon, and it's about the psychology of post-colonialism. And he worked as a psychiatrist in Algeria during the Civil War, and he drew up all these profiles of people, and out of that he deduced all this kind of mentality, which, you know, right through the world you see the same thing after the aftermath of colonialism, where people basically go into the same patterns politically, you know, giving away their natural resources, you know, allowing outsiders to come and plunder, having this sense of mimicry, wanting to copy the more sophisticated, supposedly, masters, etc., etc. We've never shaken it off, and we need to really. I'm not accusing anybody, because, you know, there's a certain kind of English accent that when I can hear it in the room, I suddenly start, you know, get my act together, you know, looking sophisticated and civilized, you know, and talking a little bit more posh, you know, and that's it. It's mimicry, and it's all of these kind of things that are really destroying us, and which we deny absolutely, because you keep saying, oh no, we're a self-confident nation now, you know. Well. That reminds me of the AA definition of an alcoholic, which is an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. You see, in extremis, all of these things get addressed, and I think we're in such a moment now. Politically, of course, it's very fragile, because if you go back to 2011, which I won't go into too much detail about, but it's a very interesting year. That was the year, I believe, there was in effect a coup in Ireland. That was the year the Queen of England came. It was the year that, the same week as the Queen, Barack Obama came. And it was almost ritualistic, occult kind of handovers of sovereignty and of, batons of all kinds. And if you look at what happened in the election, like that Enda Kenny was allowed, who is like, what could be worse than Enda Kenny? Sorry, Simon Harris could be worse than Enda Kenny. I will give you that. But other than that, like if you remember in 2010, the Troika came in November and basically abjectly humiliated the people of Ireland, took their sovereignty, threw them a few scraps and then left. Immediately, I remember that so clearly, that month of December, that was the month of the big snow as well, which maybe wasn't a coincidence. But there was this massive snow, the White Christmas, went on for weeks. But that month, the sense of the sulfuric mood of the public at that time, it was like, we're not going to take this. It's like that, Peter French network. Remember Peter French had everybody their heads out the window. We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And that was the mood. And then everybody in the country literally was thinking about starting a political movement. But then somebody did. And they announced it. And everybody said, oh, that's great. Because the person doing it was such a elevated personage, and so respected and reliable, and if he's doing it, I don't know. And you know who that was? Fintan O'Toole, or Fintan 19, I call him, and David McWilliams, and Eamon Dunphy. But look what happened there. The election was announced in January for February, middle of February. I think it was the 14th, 15th of February. And immediately Fintan O'Toole went into print in the Irish Times and said, oh, the notice is too short. We don't really have time, I wrote an article in the Irish Times actually saying, the revolution has been postponed because we cannot find a babysitter. And that's what happened. And literally that moment that all the people who were going to start movements, 3.5 million of them, have said, oh, it's too late. Now it is genuinely too late. So it's like that Bob Dylan line from, times they are changing. Hey, Mr. Congressman, please hear my call. Don't stand in the doorway. Don't block up the hall. Well, that was for Fintan. Dylan was a prophet. He was prophesying that moment. Enda sailed in, and the rest is where we are. Interesting. And just think about this. I was just talking to some people earlier on. You just think about this. Now think about this, what I say about a coup. The word I use is autogolpe. It's a Spanish word for self-coup. Autogolpe. Think about this for just a scenario. Enda Kenny with the Labour Party, got an overall majority in 2011, right? Because there was no opposition to him. There was a bit of a ragbag of independents, Ming and Mick and all those guys who were lined up at the back of the Dáil for a few, shouting and roaring. Like they were having a scruffy competition or something. Enda went on, he sold us down the river, he promised he wouldn't, he did. And then in 2016 there was an election, and basically Fine Gael and all belonging to them got hammered, right? But Enda still stayed in power because the Fianna Fáil came in and did a confidence and supply deal with them. See? And then a year later, Varadkar took over. Still no mandate since 2011. He went on to 2020. Another election, he got hammered. He stayed on. Not only did he stay on, but he stayed on without any mandate whatever, because he had been kicked out. The most draconian, the most unprecedented, the most egregious legislation ever introduced. His government introduced it as a caretaker administration. In June, he did what he could have done in the first place, which is to go into coalition with Fianna Fáil, which, by the way, was something both parties had said would never happen. They swore on their mother's Bible that it would never happen. And then on we went again. And so we see now that in the last 13 years, 11 of those years that we've had Fine Gael Taoiseach. and in another month we're going to have the third in 13 years, and still no mandate. At this stage, Aidan, you and me have more of a mandate to run this country than any of those bastards.
Well, you'll be the one going up for election. So you said it was 53% overall here, but it's way more in the West, and you're going for election in the West.
Virtually the entire country, apart from Dublin and Munster. So it's more than half the country. It's like, if you think of it, the Midlands northwest goes from Malin Head right down to Galway, all along the west coast, Connacht, right? And then it zips right across up to Louth, just cuts this above Dublin, and it's everything above that line. So it's like it's almost 2/3 of the Republic, geographically, maybe not population-wise, but geographically, certainly.
So with that in mind, do you think that you can win?
Well, I'm a natural-born pessimist, so I'm told I can win. And I believe the people who say that, to the extent that it's worth trying. It is my heartland. You know, I was born in Roscommon. I worked in Mayo. I spent a lot of time in Galway. My father came from Sligo. I spent a lot of time down there. In Donegal, they're my people in Donegal more than anywhere else. You know, it's only when even in Longford, I'm used to be quite well popular enough. It's only when you start moving towards Dublin that I start to lose that, you know, sheen or whatever it is. And so, I mean, you know, who knows? I mean, who's going to run? We don't know. I mean, and you know something, I don't really mind. I don't really think of myself as competing against anybody other than the party monsters, the big beasts. I mean, the more candidates that run, you know, the happier I'll be. I would like everybody in Ireland to run.
Fine Gael are in desperate need of candidates now. Would you not go with them and fill the gap?
Well, you know, it is tempting, because, you know, the way things are going, if I did, I'd probably be Taoiseach by Christmas.
I'd like to see that world.
But you know, I mean, really, I have said many times, and I don't in any way resile from it, even though, you know, I'm in the political system in a sense. I think of myself as a citizen politician. I've just made that up. But I've been saying for several years now that my ambition would be to be a part of a government in Ireland in some way, and that we would be able to make certain bodies illegal organisations, and that would be Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, People Before Profit, Sinn Féin. Any more?
The Greens, whoa, the worst of them.
That they would be illegal organisations in the way that Sinn Féin IRA used to be, and that they wouldn't even get on TV, and that if they did get on TV, we'd have to have actors saying their words in the way that we used to have Jerry Adams on. And the actor, that's what I want. That is my ambition for the Irish political system.
So when you're a Taoiseach, you're going to make the rest of the parties illegal.
It's been done before, you know. This will go out. I know some people will actually put this out as a serious conversation. But
Leo's gone. Is he gone because he got hammered with the no vote, or is there something else behind that?
It's hard to read. I mean, I was on with Jerry there last week. We did a lot of speculation around the many possibilities, and I don't really know that I do think that he was told his time was up, but I'm not sure what it was. Was it because that solo run he went on in the United States for St. Patrick's Day? That was like a kind of a middle finger to whoever told him he was superfluous, or it was the thing that provoked them. I can't say for sure. I mean, he clearly was at that point either of a mindset that he knew he was gone, or he wanted to go. But I don't think you can screw around with the people that I'm talking about. So I think it might have been agreed. I think it might have been agreed that he would do something that would make it look like, you know, he wanted to go, and because, you know, it kind of came out of the blue. I saw a clip with Pascal Donohoe complaining that He didn't tell them about it in advance. I don't know, did he tell anybody? It was very unexpected. And I'm not convinced that it was to do with the referendums, but on the other hand, that might be because we don't really know exactly. There are many theories as to what was going on with those referendums, and people did smell rats all over the place. But we didn't really come to any definitive conclusion as to what element was most important for them in that package that seemed to be the undertows of those referendums. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that they must have been expecting that you would have expected that Coveney would have taken over, and the fact that he didn't, you're kind of in free fall then. I mean, there's either him or McEntee. And that's a really hard call, isn't it?
She's the queen of the hate speech, but it looks like that might be dead in the water too, is it?
All the signs are that it is. All the backbenchers that are revolting. Sinn Féin is obviously washing his hands of it. But Harris has said that he's going to go ahead with it. And see, you don't get to be Taoiseach of Ireland now unless you're approved of by the World Economic Forum. And so therefore, it's what you do is what they want, or else you walk. And it seems to me that it's well possible that despite all the above ground activity we're watching, that Harris will actually double down and try and push it through. I mean, he's very. That's the thing. That is his great talent, that he doesn't have any sensitivities at all. He is completely immune to other people's opinions, to moods, to disapproval, to hatred of him or anything like that. It doesn't affect him, and that's his great skill. That's in a sense, because otherwise, see, Fine Gael weaponized that in him, that quality in him, which normally, like if he was in Fianna Fáil, they'd have just put him making the tea. But Fine Gaelers are kind of congenitally polite, and they pretend not to notice when somebody's a complete barking lunatic. And so they began to realize that he was quite a useful weapon, that he kind of was so impervious, and he would blunder in where nobody else would dare to go, and that it was quite effective in ways.
Well, maybe you'll need to learn from that, because I'm guessing you're going to need thick skin if you're going up for the election, which you are, because if you make a difference and they're scared of you and they're trying to cancel you and they're probably going to call you names.
I've been called all the names. They've run out of names.
They've run out of names.
I don't know. You see, that's the thing.
Look, there they are now. Look, you just heard your name, John.
You see, that's the thing about the names. I keep telling people, that the best way, rather than being running scared of all these names, if you just say, when somebody starts calling your name, just say, okay, come on, let's have some more. Is that all you got? And eventually they just run out of abuse. And say, now can we actually have a conversation about what's going on? And so that really, the names thing is, Roger Scruton talks about this names that he's dead now, but he's in this term spell words, which are kind of like these words which have extraordinary power beyond the normal run of things. So racist, misogynist, these are all invented, homophobe. These are all spell words which are created in order to create a spell around the person. And it's almost like, the way I think of it is like it's cattle prod, You kind of go, and there's, electric field opens up around you, and it clears the space. Nobody will go near you. And everybody looks at that and says, I don't want that to happen to me, so I won't go to say, what did he do? What did he say? Yeah, so I'm not going to do and say that. And this is really what's going on. So what we need to do in that context is simply say, okay, that's what that is, and we're not going to pay any more heed to it. Just let them rant on, because we need to say certain things about our country, and we need to say certain things about our future, and we need to say things that will protect our homeland from the attack that it's now under. We can't afford. I mean, which is worse, that you get called a name, or that your children have no home in 30 years' time, or your grandchildren have no home in 30 years' time? This is how serious it is. I think that the referendum showed that people are scared of those words. But then when they can overcome, if they find a way to overcome that fear, look what happens. You get this result, which is having these like seismic effects now in the psyche and in the political system. And you know, that tells us that it's a good idea to shake off those fears if we can, and just, you know, I mean, and once you do, they lose their power. Once you start saying, I don't care what you call me it again, come on, call it again, they lose their power.
Lenny Bruce, the comedian, did a lot on that in the past. You know, he used these words, I won't say them now, but you can look it up, and he gave the power to the word and let people see it's just a word and how you use it. And then he ended up in court and so on, but he won, long term he won, like, as in people are allowed to use these words now, whereas before it was seen as
obscenities. No, I very much admired Lenny Bruce's stance with it, and it was very, very subtle points he was making, you know, about free speech. And you see, one of the things about free speech that we seem to have lost is that it's not a luxury. Like, there's kind of been a view developed in our culture now where that it's like, it's an add-on value, you know, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing for people, particularly wrong-headed people, to be allowed to say things that are wrong. Yeah, that's kind of the tolerance of, you know. But no, that's not what free speech is at all. Free speech is actually the only thing that matters. If you want freedom, you need free speech. You can't have freedom without free speech. And free speech has to be pretty much absolute. In other words, nobody can have a veto over what you say, because if they have, you have to ask, well, who are they and how did they get that veto and how is it being used? So, you know, obviously the old cliche about fire in a crowded theatre and all that, yes, but, you know, how many times did that actually happen? If all of the people in the country believe the same thing, are saying the same thing, save for one person who's saying something different, then that society has a greater interest in hearing what that one person has to say than in hearing all the others put together. Because that person, if they be wrong, at least will have the benefit that they will strengthen the certitude of the society in the view it has taken. And if they are right, they will may save that society from absolute disaster. And that's what we're playing with when we start to frick around with free speech. You know, it's an extraordinary thing that we have lived through times of freedom in Ireland, when we would have laughed or would have been shocked to hear about countries which try to ban people and stop people saying things and bringing in legislation saying that there's certain categories of people that you can't criticize and so on and so forth. We'd have thought that was absolutely crazy, draconian, totalitarian. Now we're doing it. And everybody say, oh, well, no, it's necessary. It's necessary. Why is it necessary? It's necessary so you can keep winning the argument. The person who's speaking, that's why. The only reason they bring in this is because they don't like the arguments that people are making, and they know that those arguments, if they are heard by the generality of people, will pass muster. And that's why they want to shut people up. You know, this is deadly stuff, because when you lose free speech, you lose freedom. That's it. Like, you know, in the COVID period, we lost freedom, we lost free speech. There was nobody allowed, and the costs of that have not even been put on the balance sheet yet, because they haven't been recognised at a collective level, at a societal level. Because again, that censorship prevails still, and this is very serious. You know, so I have this sense of, you know, that if you were to take the mythological year 1984, but go back to the 1984, the actual year in Ireland, which is the year I came to Dublin first, on the 1st of May. If you think about that year, and I remember that year very clearly in lots of ways, in the colour of it, the mood of it, the sense of, you know, expectation, the idea of Ireland at the time, which was that it was a poor country, but we had dreams, and we had creativity and energy, which we don't have now. And that's so you put 1984 down there, and then you put, you know, 2024 down there, and you look at those, you know, one to the other. And if you meditate upon those 2 years, and in a short time something occurs to you. There's something wrong. There's something wrong here. 1984, 2024. Oh, what is it? I know. This should be here. and this should be there. Because this is where we would love to go to. This is where we would like progress to take us to. This is where we would regard ourselves as a modern, civilized nation. And this is a fucking backwater.
Vote for John and you can go backwards, back in time.
Well, no, I want to go forward to 1984.
I hear you. We mentioned comedy and free speech. I've been talking with other comedians, the likes of David McSavage, about cancel culture and what we're allowed to say, what we're not. The trans thing is a big thing. If you mention trans anything, if you mention you think it's a bad idea to give children puberty blockers, boom, you get cancelled very quickly. And I know you're very interested in comedy, so as a comedian I want to hear what you've to say about comedy and its role. And I also had a conversation with you once where you mentioned doing a comedy documentary. Did you? Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did years ago when I was on Arts Express with Mike Murphy years ago. And yeah, I've done a lot. I've written essays about comedy. I know that's a very ponderous thing to do, but there's a French philosopher called Bergson, who talks about the quintessential factor in comedy is rigidities in a society, that the comedian goes after those rigidities, those things which people refuse to kind of look at or to which they're scared of actually trying to move, and that's the great need that societies have for comedy, so that we can rattle those things and ridicule those pompous assholes who kind of want to take away our freedoms or who want to kind of bear down upon us or whatever it is, and I think that's really true. Like we you see those. One of the things that happens in all of these kind of cultural movements that we've been seeing, the woke thing, is that there's radical changes in the culture with regard to the meanings of words. Now, say the word racism is a really good example. Racism actually always meant to look upon another race or a member of another race as inferior on account of that fact, their ethnicity or their colour, whatever, and to regard them as inferior, and as yourself or whatever as superior. That's what racism was. But actually, racism now in our culture means something completely different. It means something that is it's identifiable now by, say, it's almost impossible to describe what it is, except to say that it's kind of something that is accompanied by a kind of a sharp intake of breath, by virtue of the constructs around our culture that have been built in the very recent past. So that it no longer has anything to do necessarily with regarding somebody as inferior. It just is saying something that annoyed a black person. That's racist. Now, if I say something to annoy you, you're going to be annoyed, and that's it. Like, you don't have any protection.
I'll be very offended.
But if you were, I would have to be at least 10 times as careful if you had a different coloured face.
I could put on some blackface.
I wouldn't try that. It's been done. But you see what I mean? Like, you can't make jokes of a certain kind about such a person. You can't criticise such a person. You can't make life appear to be a little bit more difficult for such a person, even if it's just for tomorrow or for the next hour. You can't assume anything. You can't irritate that person. Now, that's racist too. Like what kind of a nonsense is that? What kind of a society would it be if that were to run for centuries? What would it be? Would it be a complete oligarchy where there's a tyranny on top of the people, whatever their characteristics were, the protected characteristics they're called in the hate speech legislation? And that's essentially what they want to do, to create a two-tier system of justice, a two-tier system of culture, where there will be elevated sections who will be protected by these laws, protected from criticism, protected from ridicule, protected from laughter, protected from annoyance, and so on, and the rest of us can go to hell. And this is supposedly a democratic society. And you see, but here we keep coming to you go into all these things, you go under all this, and at the very bottom, there's the most fundamental thing, which is conversation. You see, again, and as John Stuart Mill, it's that capacity to have opinions. That's what leavens, that's what actually helps to militate against these absurdities. You know, these rigidities that develop in a society. They don't get a chance to settle if you have conversation, if you have comedy, if you have laughter. You know, if people can ridicule you for saying something stupid, you know, it might annoy you and embarrass you and all that, but it's a really good thing for everybody that that's there. And if you're being excused that because you have a particular colour of face, or a particular sexual proclivity, or whatever it is, then gradually you find that virtually, you know, a greater part of society is in some category that it elevates them above the common commentary of the conversation. And therefore, this is highly dangerous. It's lethal, actually, to freedom, it's lethal to democracy, and it's ultimately lethal to civilization.
The first time I ever heard your name, John, it was my father reading an article in probably the Times or the Independent or one of them, and he goes, "This fella writes whatever the fuck he likes. I like this fella." So, what's changed in journalism, you know, from back when you were writing in these papers and now?
It's been bought. It's been bought. There's no journalism is just bought. It's bought propaganda, bought lies now. I call them journal liars. They're not journalists anymore. You know, they're just, you see, the problem was, all of these things, by the way, it's very important to keep reminding yourself about all this stuff. I'll come back to the media point in a minute, but that in all of these things, we're talking in a certain sense about what appear to be organic developments, but actually they're all orchestrated. Culturally orchestrated over a long period, over decades, centuries. This has been planned. And so you can see, it's almost like looking into the engine of a car and saying, well, there's the distributor and there's the coil, and that's how they work together and all that, you know. And so here you look and see that the internet is very important to all this. And the media, the mainstream media and the internet. So what happened was the media, the model, the media up to like 20 years ago, newspapers could pay their way with their cover price and advertising, and they were relatively independent. There was some tension on that, around that with advertising sometimes, but if you had a good editor, a strong editor, that didn't really, like in the Irish Times under Douglas Gageby, just before my time, he was a really great editor, and if anybody tried to interfere with him, he'd just leave the phone down. But what happened then was that the internet started to you see, the newspapers put up their news online for free, and all the social media companies started to circulate it. So it became a free commodity, but it had to be paid for at source. The journalists still had to be paid to produce this. So, and then what happened was that less and less people were inclined to buy the newspapers, and less advertisers were inclined to advertise in them. And so there was less money to pay for the journalism, and the quality of the journalism deteriorated, and the business model of the media just collapsed. And then they needed a new source of funding. Well, they got it. In 2020, they got it. The government said, okay, so you're on your uppers, but I'll tell you what, you've been printing the truth for the last like 170 years. Now you're going to have to print some lies for us, and we'll give you just as much money as you used to get in the old days. How about that? And they said, that sounds a good deal, yeah. So they basically flipped their model from truth to lies. I call it the set-aside media. It's like, that back in the 90s, I think they still do it. Well, they do it in different forms. The EU had this policy which they called set-aside for land. And the idea was that farmers would qualify for increased grants if they put their land out of commission, and that they could prove to the EU that they weren't using it. And the way you had to prove it was that you had to spray the fields with poison so they would turn yellow and they could be seen from the satellite above. And then you would get the grant. See? Same things happen to the media. But in place of yellowing their fields, what they do is they use terms like far right. Like I think the rule is something like the term far right has to be in 5 times in every paragraph in order to qualify for the grant. the subvention. Something like that. Maybe not exactly that, but you know, some formula like that. And you know, white supremacy is another good one. And you know, all that racism, and you know, it's conspiracy theories, obviously, anti-vaxxer, you know, all these terms. And there's an office somewhere, you know, in government buildings where they get the papers every day, and they count the number of times that these words appear. And if they reach the necessary level, then they get the subvention that the next week, something like that.
That sounds like a conspiracy theory, John.
No, but it's a good idea, isn't it? I just made that last bit up, but actually, now that I think of it, now that this goes out, I mean, you'll find they'll do it, because they'll say, this is a great idea. This is a great idea. Why didn't we think of this? You know, it'd be so simple.
So come here, with Leo down and Fine Gael falling apart, it's kind of created maybe a potential new era in Irish politics. Like, what's going to happen now? Are they going to vote for these? Well, you mentioned Citizen.
Yeah, well, okay, this is a really interesting question and a really interesting moment, because it has enormous possibilities, but it also could go really bad. Okay, well, see, the moment we have to go back to, as I say, is 2011. And the way that Aidan Killian came in, and then from that election, really, you've had you had the coup, and the idea of a self-coup or Hoccolpe is that the government will be permanent. The government will just go on. Now, it doesn't matter. The personnel is not the important thing. The important thing is the ideology, and that has continued now for 13 years, and that's the idea of the autocolpe. So now we have to break that cycle. That's the task. So, I mean, in a way, I'm going for Europe, but that's, to some extent, I mean, the important that is striking while the iron is still hot after the referendums. Because, I mean, if we wait for the election, that could be a year, and that's too long. The danger is that we will allow the same thing to happen as happened after 2011, which is that energy is soaked up. I mean, we got a ragbag of mainly left-wing TDs after in that election, quite a significant number. I think 25, something like that. It was quite a significant number, but they were highly ineffectual. Like, they did nothing really. In fact, now, you know, maybe in a certain sense, that was inevitable because they were predicated on the economic issues solely. That was their thing. Now it's not economic issues, it's social issues, if you might, to use a loose term. And the kind of independence we're likely to have now are going to be very different. You know, I don't like terms like left and right, really. I don't like populist either, but they're going to be people who come at certain questions from an old-fashioned, commonsensical position. In other words, they will believe bizarre things like that it's not really a good idea to teach 7-year-old children about fisting.
Why not? How else are they going to learn? You expect them to be 9 years old and not know about fisting?
I did say old-fashioned, right? I did say old-fashioned. So this is in different opportunities, because, like, see, what happened that time was that energy just frittered away, like it without trace. There was no reaction, really, to what Kenny did. No reaction to the Troika, ultimately, politically. Nothing. And we went on. And then worse happened in 2020. And worse is about to happen again now, because we're on the verge of a total meltdown economically in the world. The financial systems are coming down. The money systems, the currencies, all that's going to come down. And that's going to be a momentous moment. I mean, it's so crazy that I don't think we should go into it, because it's scary. It's almost like you need to have, you know, your armor on before you even start to talk about it. But so I think that, you know, there's quite interesting rumblings now from different quarters about independence. There's a group down in Galway called the Irish People, based in Galway, and they've got lots of independence running. Michael McDowell has started an alliance. There's a rural alliance. I'm not sure if that's still separate from McDowell or what. There seems to be crossover there. And there's another one I've just heard about that's just started up. I mean, again, it's almost like that idea, you know, that I've said that everybody should run for the Dáil. Everybody. Yeah, everybody who's 18 and over should run for the Dáil. And like, so they run out of paper for their voting slip, for, you know. And the idea is to become the tail that wags the dog. See, this the principle that Irish politics, why Irish politics has ended up the way it has, is because, first of all, we have the main two Civil War parties have zero principles about anything except getting elected. That's their only principle. And so when Fine Gael never really were able to have an overall majority, but Fianna Fáil did. But when they lost that capacity, things changed radically, because it meant that every government was a coalition, and there would be one small, highly ideological party and one large, totally non-ideological party. And the non-ideological party would just throw to the others, the little party, all the things that it had no interest in, which was pretty much anything important. Anything, you know, other than money and defence, and well, no, we don't do defence either, foreign policy. Everything else, this junior party basically got it. And that's where all the trouble started. And essentially what needs to happen is that the independents go in, forge some kind of alliance that is solid and will not fall apart, and goes into coalition then with the government and imposes its will as that tail wagging the dog to reverse all this. All the stuff that's happened in the last 12 to 15 years. That's, I think, the one hope that the political system offers. It's a very long shot. It could fritter away, and you're dealing with very sly and cunning forces here, obviously. To say nothing about the supranational exterior forces, the unknown unknowns who are out there manipulating all this. But what else can we do? What else can we do? I mean, this is the point. We're in desperate straits. Our country is on the verge of extinction. It's on the verge it's under serious existential threat now. And you know, because the media are telling lies. See, what the media do is, it's not just telling lies. That isn't an adequate way of seeing it. They construct a pseudo-reality on a day-to-day basis, which convinces people that this is actually what's happening. This is the reality of life in your country. When in fact, what's happening is nothing like what they're saying at all. You know, and this is why you get this total disjunction sometimes. People don't know what you're talking about. You know, if you go and, like, I remember, like, there down Sligo there last year, I was talking to some guy, very intelligent man. He's a pathologist and a doctor and so on, but he had the Irish Times under his arm, and that's a dead giveaway. You know, I was talking in this kind of way, maybe about the terrible situation we're facing and blah blah blah. And he's looking at me, kind of puzzled face, and he says, "What, you mean Brexit?" I said, "No, I don't mean Brexit." You know, like the people, that's because if you're in that world, it's literally like a stage set is being built around you, and all you're seeing is this sort of reality. You know, it's like, I remember one time in the Abbey, a few Leonard had a play on called The House, and they actually built a house on the stage. So the curtain went up and you were looking at a house, an actual house, like literally had been built with slates and everything. And it's like that's what we have, like, and you think, well, this is real. This is real. This is the reality. And anybody who says different is a conspiracy theorist. But this is the conspiracy. You're in it. You know, this is the trick they've pulled, and it's absolutely beyond imagination. Really, it's beyond belief that they could do this. But we've seen that they did it, and we know how they're doing it. But we still can't fully expose it to people who are in it because they're in it, and that's all they see.
And they want the roof over their head.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a nice house.
John, the government, I heard, are trying to bring in an EU migration pact to sign some sort of agreement that even once they're gone, the country will have to bring in X amount of people from other countries. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Is that going to happen? And tell us a bit about that, John.
Well, these words are not adequate to what's happening, and migration is not what it is. I mean, people always migrated. People came to Ireland. People, you know, they got work here. They got visas to come here. There was never a question about this. What's happening now is like huge numbers being brought en bloc and dumped in places where they're tiny populations, where they immediately alter the ecology of the place by their presence. And basically the result is that the culture and the security of that place is stolen, is plundered and gone. And the government is completely remorseless about this. You see, this is the thing really we should look at here is more than anything. It's the demeanour and the mien of the government towards its own people. That they really are in the stage where they have complete contempt now. Because they're really carrying out the instructions of overlords who have some kind of profound hold over them. And we could speculate about this, and indeed we do. Is it money? Is it compromise? What is it? But that it seems clear that the way they keep talking, even when things go wrong for them, they just keep moving on to the next phase, And that's why I say, I don't believe that the hate speech thing is gone. I need to see it buried at the crossroads with a stake through its heart before I'll be sure it's gone. But so this is just the next escalation. I think the main factor involved in this is that there will be providing accommodation rather than from the private sector in various office blocks. The government itself will be doing this, and I think that's possibly because they were having problems with some of the people who were looking at doing providing the accommodation, who were losing their nerves in the face of the public outrage about it. But it's clear, that we're post-democracy in Ireland. The will of the people no longer counts for anything, and along with that, there is the sense that, we are being told that this idea, remember Micheál Martin said that we won't have any truck with old-fashioned sovereignty. What that means fundamentally is also we won't have any truck with, the idea that this is your country. Where'd you get that idea? This is a piece of earth which we manage. And you're here, and you can stay so long as you keep your fucking mouth shut. But, we have work to do here now in running this business, which is Ireland Inc. And this is the plan we have, which has been given to us by our external overlords, and you're getting in the way. So please, in your own interest, would you ever just shut up? That's the tone. And that means that people, it's quite shocking. There was pictures came out of Ballahadreen there last week, which are really shocking, beyond belief. I knew that town. Ballahadreen is a town which is very similar size to the town I come from, which is Castlerea, which is 12 miles away. And my father drove a mail car, and we used to go there twice a day, and we'd be there at 6 o'clock in the morning delivering mails. And it's a really beautiful, old-fashioned market town. It's now pretty much obliterated. I was aware of that because you go in there and there's nobody on the streets even in the middle of the week. It's because there's 700 foreigners in a town of 2,000 people. And last week these images picked up that they're not even. There's now an estate there or several estates where they're just dumping their rubbish out the window or out the back door, and it's all cluttered, gathering around the houses in this whole estate. It's just old furniture, and bags of junk and rubbish and whatever. And this is something people are just saying, well, here's a straw, suck it up. You can't say, this is unthinkable. If we go back 10, 15 years, the social services would have moved into a house that those conditions were in. They would have said, you can't do that, you can't do those things. But no, if you're a migrant, if you have that colour face, then you can do what you like. And nobody can question you, or they're a hater, they're a hate speecher. We need to get over this. And we need to say to our government, you're the criminals, not us. They're trying to lock us up for what we might say in defence of our own inheritance, our own children's metaphysical home. We're not criminals. Radker is a criminal. Martin is a criminal. Harris is a criminal. Ryan is a criminal. They should be in jail. Not me, not you, not Jim O'Doherty, not anybody like that. These people speaking for the Irish soul, for the Irish heart, are being criminalised by these people. And it has to stop. Because otherwise there won't be in Ireland. Last year alone, 100,000 young Irish people applied for visas in Australia alone. Meanwhile, 150,000 approximately came in. If you say they met their replacements, in other words, those 100,000 Irish people met their replacements at the airport, that's racist. The word replacement is racist. Why? Because it's fucking true.
Talking about being criminalised, you have a book called The COVID Chronicles. Is that correct? Are you bringing a book about the COVID?
Not that one. That's a terrible title. Where did you hear that? I have a book which I'm ready to, it's kind of in the late stage of production. I don't know, it'll probably outcome this time. It's called The Abolition of Reality. And the subtitle is the subtitle is the first draft of the end of history, because that's how serious it is. Yeah, that's how serious it is. We're at the end of history. Like Fukuyama wrote 30 years ago or 35 years ago about the end of history, but that was a kind of an abstract ideological concept. This is the real end of history, because you just think of what's happened in Ireland. If they succeed in this, when you see now what's going on with the cultural undertows or overtows that are going on in relation to replacement, where the culture, Ireland's culture is being disparaged, people are being told they're Irish from the minute they step on the tarmac at Dublin Airport. It's only a matter of time before they rewrite our history. And within a generation, there won't be a history of Ireland qua Ireland. There will only be a history of the new Ireland with the new Irish. That's where we're going. So when I say the end of history, I really mean it.
Something to look forward to.
I mean, if you were in school learning history, you'd probably think that was a great idea.
I do think we should have a break shortly, guys, but is there anything you'd like to say before the break, John?
These are highly complex issues, but they're all connected. Like, that's the amazing thing that you see about all this. All of the things we're looking at now are all interconnected. There's singular attack and assault, a hybrid war being waged against the Irish people, against other races and other nations as well. But in particular, and of course, we're being Irish, we're here, we're suffering this. So all of this is interconnected. And it's a strange, strange thing, you know, because to be alive at this moment is a very strange thing, very upsetting, very disturbing, but also in a strange way, kind of, I don't know what you call it, fulfilling. You know, because suddenly, you know, the kind of, any sense you had that your life was, you know, humdrum or, you know, kind of just wandering aimlessly, you know, towards the grave or whatever, that's got to go. You know, we're now utterly focused, fixated on what this means, what we're going to do, and in every level. I mean, people talk about it being a spiritual war. It is a spiritual war in lots of different senses, but in this particular sense, that this is good versus evil. This is the good of Ireland and its people against the evil that is trying to destroy it. And that doesn't, I'm not talking about people coming here, the people, they're just patsies. They're just proxies. They're just battering rams which are being used to beat down the people of Ireland, to humiliate them, to make them feel guilty, to make them feel ashamed. You know, where's your compassion? Where's your compassion? You know, like this kind of nonsense, you know. To my answer to that, by the way, is, well, there's 1.5 billion Africans still over there. Why aren't you getting them here now? What are you going to do about them? Where's your humanity for them? You know, it's just nonsense. These people are getting away with blue murder because of the corruption of the media, and because people are scared of those swear words, those spell words. If we could just shake that off and just stand up and say, enough, stop now. Here's the deal. We're telling you now, this is what's going to happen in our country. Then it would stop. What would happen outside, what would happen as a result of that from, in turn, the exterior master is another day's work. We have to think about that too. But our primary problem is the treason of our political class. We do not have, as I said a million times, we do not have a mass migration problem. We have a mass treason problem.
John, I think you can win. I'd like to see it happen, you know, a man with your intellect and integrity and honour, you know, and it would be really uplifting for the country. And I'm sure we'd all like to know what we can do to help. Maybe you can tell us that in the second time. I know we can't vote for you here in Southside Dublin, but guys, if you have any questions in the second half, we'll give you, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes to mingle, and then we'll come back. Does that sound good? John Waters. Now, have you any questions for John? I will repeat your question just so it can get picked up here. So, why are people afraid? Why have they got no backbone? John.
Well, yeah, she also asked, was it about the post-colonial thing? No, that's not. Obviously, these are factors in everything, really, but there are more immediate reasons and really one singular reason. And that's because of the activities of certain groups in our society in the past decade, who were let loose and literally let as attack dogs into our culture, so as to attack and demonize and hopefully cancel anybody who dared to question anything that was being proposed. And I would list in particular the LGBT mob, and because again, this is not the same as gay. You see, again, remember the point I make about all of these things not being organic. They have the appearance of being organic, of being naturalistic events, but they're all orchestrated. So the LGBT goons are simply being used precisely for that purpose, as attack dogs, in order to intimidate people. But the primary purpose is not actually to achieve what the LGBT people are looking for, although they get that as their reward. But it's actually to demoralize the population in the first instance, to silence the population, and ultimately then the objective of all of that was to sabotage the Irish Constitution, particularly, you know, the fundamental rights section from Articles 40, 41, 42, 43 and 44. And in that they're halfway through that now. They've had 3 major blows at the Constitution in the past decade. They lost this one, but they'll be back to finish that off if they can. But the effect of that it was what I call mutism, or lockjaw, national lockjaw, whereby people in a country that really was the most argumentative and garrulous and talkative country in Europe, if not the world, suddenly people started around 2014, 15, started looking behind them before they said anything, even in a pub. I was talking to a couple of farmers down in Sligo there a short time ago, and one of them was telling me the night before, like that he'd been in the pub in Grange and with a bunch of lads, and he suddenly noticed there was something odd. He says, why are we speaking so low down? Like, why are we talking like that? And one of the guys says, well, I'll tell you why. He says, because I was in Kearney the other night, and we were talking like this, and there was some woman listening, but I didn't realise. And the next thing, she's screaming at me that I'm a racist because of something I said. And said, that's why we're talking down low. And that has been pervasive in Ireland now for nearly a decade. And this is actually, again, orchestrated. The government approve of this. They like this. The government, which talks about democratic values and Western values and European values, they love this. And they're people who are sending out groups like Antifa, you know, who will be on the streets again now for this election campaign. You bet your bottom dollar, masked, helping the An Garda Síochána, or being helped by An Garda Síochána to quell and silence anybody who dares to question the government. This is the stuff that happens in North Korea. Well, I got to tell you, we are north of North Korea right now. And we better wake up to that, because you see, again, the pseudo-reality tells you, no, it's the far right, they're the danger to our democracy. There's no far right, and they're not, even if there were, there wouldn't be a danger to our democracy. The most there would be Dad's army. There is no far right in Ireland. But what there is ordinary citizens seeking to defend their birthright, their nation, their children's homeland, their metaphysical home, and they're being demonized by a corrupt press on a daily basis. The technique that they have, you got to think about this far right business in a particular way. It's really an instrument of groupthink. Groupthink it can be created in a room, it can be created in a country. And one of the most essential elements of creating a groupthink is to construct an outgroup. The outgroup is the enemy that threatens everybody. They're the barbarians at the gate that are about to rampage in the town or in the community and destroy your freedoms, destroy your democracy. Well, it's the opposite. The people at the gate are trying to free people. They're trying to warn people of what's happening. And the government is trying to destroy democracy and freedom. That's the real scenario. And the press, of course, the corrupt press. That's another thing we're going to have to do. We're going to have to declare all the media organisations illegal also. And I would go further. I have gone further. Not alone that, but that their buildings have to be razed to the ground and monuments erected on the sites, so that we never forget what these people have done to our country, and that it never happens again.
So you don't think you'll get a job in RTE then?
You never know.
You never know, if they pay enough. Obviously I can't capture all of that, but it's talking about fear. People are afraid to get involved, but even more so, they're even afraid to be seen with people who are getting involved.
Yeah, that's very real. I'm very conscious of that. I mean, you can see that in personal relationships even. I've been able to see it for the last few years. Like in my own situation, like people that I know who know me, and they know my middle name isn't Adolf, for example. They still will keep a distance from me because they don't want to be implicated. They don't want to be. It's we say, well, somebody coming up and saying, I didn't realise that you know that Waters. How long have you known him now? That kind of thing. And so all of this is going on. This is the kind of stuff that happened in under the Stasi in East Germany and all this stuff, and other places that you're not allowed to mention. But let's say, like in Nazi Germany in the 30s, this is how it began. This is just the point that people often mistake. They say, oh, you can't make egregious comparisons like the judge said to us with in Nazi Germany. Well, maybe you can't yet make egregious comparisons with Nazi Germany at when it got to the really bad stages in the 1940s. But maybe you could go back into the early 30s and look at what was happening then and make comparisons with that, because I can tell you they're very strong. And this is really where these people are playing with fire. And in some respects you have to kind of conclude that it can only be ignorance that is enabling them to do that they just simply don't know. Because if it's anything worse than that, then it is really deadly. These people are really criminals, and at a very advanced stage, because they are essentially turning Ireland into an extraordinarily dangerous place. And I think, in fact, they are doing that, whether accidentally or stupidly or whatever. That is happening. They're creating a powder keg in Ireland, in which racism will be the least of our problems.
John, can you say something about the anti-human negative vibe that was going on for the last 4 years?
Oh, I certainly can. I mean, to me, I remember, I become physically ill when I think of 2020, when I think of the atmosphere that was abroad then, when I think of the pretense of these politicians that they were saving lives, when in fact they were putting people in harm's way in all kinds of ways. The lying of them, the lying of this pretense that we're such heroic people, the frontline workers and all this sort of stuff. It makes me ill to think about that. This has been the darkest period, I think, in our history in independence, and it's really a serious contender for the darkest period in all history. And if it goes on much longer, it's going to become that willy-nilly. Because, my sense of it is that it's not just by no means finished, if indeed it is very well even properly started. The most shocking thing has been the demeanour of our own politicians, to me. These people who grew up, most of them in Ireland, Irish people who understood or seem to understand our culture, and yet they behave like savages, like monsters in the face of their own people. The idea that I find it incomprehensible. I'm not even, in a certain sense, I'm not even certain that it actually happened, even though I seem to remember it, that it could have happened, that elderly people were put into rooms and not allowed to see their own flesh and blood and left to die in that way by people calling themselves, I don't know, humanists or Christians or whatever they were calling themselves. To me, this is it's monstrous beyond belief. I can never come to terms with it. I don't know if there's anything that you can say to redeem it in any sense. And so on. I mean, then we went on to the other things, the needlework and so on. Again, the same thing, this implacable, indifference to the consequences. Like, look, even now, the denial, the pretense, the denial. Like, really, what does one conclude? I mean, you see, one time we had a thing called common sense, logic, reason. So if something happened, you know from watching Columbo, like that he goes through the various possibilities, and the one that everybody is pretending didn't happen or couldn't be the reason, that turns out to be the reason in the end. Well, apply that to this. The one thing there, I hear now that the reason that people are dying from heart attacks and strokes is because of light pollution. Do you know that?
Global warming, yeah.
Light pollution, no, it's in places where there's extra light pollution that they just, whatever it is, it makes them dizzy or something and just keel over.
They should get curtains.
Yeah, that's an idea. But, this is like you got to say, like, if somebody, if you're in the room and with all the suspects, and one guy keeps trying to say, it's definitely the guy across the road. He's definitely done it. Then he did it. He did it. And yet this is the problem. There isn't any force. This is something we've never experienced before. We could never anticipate this. We had no way of knowing that this could happen or what it might be like, which is that you would have a society completely devoid of a free press, which is basically an instrument for describing reality correctly, truthfully, in an approximate, maybe sometimes, fashion, but nevertheless to make an attempt on a daily basis to say what is true. That when you take away that, we couldn't have imagined what the consequences would be, which would be that there would be no consequences for power in any respect whatever. And that these people could lie and lie and lie in the most elaborate and extraordinary way and get away with it. And just smirk and walk away. I'll give you an example, a really extraordinary example, which was when, I think it was January 23, where Varadkar stood up on the Dáil and addressed the question of excess deaths, having previously admitted that there was a question, and he originally said, yes, there is an issue, we have to look at that. And then he came back in and said, no, there's no problem, there's no excess deaths in Ireland, there's none at all, And then he went on to list out all the reasons why people were dying in such numbers. And what did he say? Oh, that's because of, social distancing. And it's because of the people weren't getting operations. And they weren't getting their tests and their scans and so on, and other medical procedures. And everybody said, maybe so. That must be it now. You see, nothing sinister at all. Hang on a minute. Who caused the social distancing? Who's caused the hospitals to not be able to do tests? Who refused to listen when people said that was going to happen? Is there any moral or ethical difference between killing somebody with a needle and killing them by refusing them treatment? How is that an excuse? And yet he was able to say that and just, you see, that's it now. That explains it. This is what happens when you have a pseudo-reality and you don't have that ethic. From early days in journalism, it's a very imprecise and movable force, because it's based on all kinds of things, that journalistic desire to get to the bottom of things. It could be ego-driven, it could be rivalry-driven, it could be ambition-driven, it could be principle-driven, it could be justice-driven, it could be ideology-driven. But all of those forces coming together worked in an approximate way to provide for this society and other societies the mechanism of conversation, which worked as a clearinghouse for truth and falsity. And that was taken away in March of 2020. and we were left bereft, and we're still bereft because they're still out there and they're still at it. And now they're in the process of covering up the crimes that they committed back then, and they're all implicit, and they're all complicit in those crimes, and this has never happened again. That we use it, 98%, if not 100%, of the establishment of this country and every other European country and other Western country is complicit in monstrous crimes, and they don't want to get caught. And the problem is this. Because, sometimes we fall into this thing, all of us, including myself in my own head, where you think, oh, something happens, some news comes out, some new thing about the CDC or one of those things, they admit something. I think, that's it now. It's all over now. That's it. But it's not. It's never over. It's never over. Why? Because there are no consequences. It just never gets to be over. It never gets to be to that point where, because, well, how would it be over? Okay, so we need to send a police officer to arrest one of the malefactors, just say, anyone, think of a name, and we need to bring that person to a court and put him in front of a judge, and the judge then hears the case, comes up with a verdict, I'm simplifying somewhat, imposes a sentence, and then say it's a jail sentence of whatever, 2 months in Mountjoy for mass murder. Yeah, that'll be about right, wouldn't it? Well, now we need somebody to take this guy to Mountjoy. Oh, what about that guard? No, that's the guard that was dragging people off the buses by the hair of the head there only a couple of months ago. Okay, we can't really send him. What about that judge, by the way? Is he the guy that refused to listen to the application for an examination of the lockdowns? Oh, can we get another judge in to try him before we take away the prisoner? See the problem? Everybody's implicated. So there's no day of justice, no day of judgment, unless we create it from the ground up. That's where we come back to what I'm talking about, that we're clumsily approaching the political system in the hope that we will actually be able to break into it and commandeer it in some way and construct all of these edifices of justice in our country, because otherwise there won't be a country from here on out, because you can't actually, well, they say you can, but morally I don't think you can, and I don't think psychologically you can actually go on after something this enormous unless you have some kind of purging and some kind of judicial and punitive process.
Thankfully, though, we all met each other due to those times, because I think sometimes you need the darkness to see the stars. Now we've got a question there, and there, but this lady is actually first. So, just to repeat the question, John, how would you propose to unwind us from the deadly grip of the corporations, technocrats?
It is a big thing, and it is, in a certain sense, too big, but we do, for the moment, but we do need to start formulating a plan. My contribution to that discussion would be something like, well, this is beyond just the businesses, large businesses operating in our country who have an undue influence. This is basically literal fascism, which is fascism by the Mussolini definition is public-private partnerships in government. And that's what you have. You have the partnership between the political system and the corporates. And they're dictating what they want our country to be like, what it needs, what's wrong with its constitution, what it needs to be removed from its constitution, all that. And that's, of course, connected into a bigger infrastructure of what I call the combine, which is bankers, elites, very rich people, and who are in control of the entire basically the globe. The problem is, the model of economy that we chose way back in the 60s, when it was kind of decided that Ireland was a failed entity and that we were incapable of living by our own lights. In reality, we hadn't tried it. We got our independence at a very bad time, between 2 world wars. We were left basically hanging out to dry by the rest of the world, and we never really got off the ground. So we kind of concluded at the end, rather illogically in my view, that we couldn't fend for ourselves. And then what happened was in the 60s when Lemass came in, and I mean I'm veering now towards the idea that this great hero Lemass was a bit of a villain really, you know, when you look retrospectively at what he did to Ireland and what the dependency that he brought us into, a new dependency. What I often say about this is that it's like that we inherited from our grandfather a nice shop in the middle of the town with an apartment overhead. And there was a cafe opposite the road, and we couldn't figure out. We were sat in the cafe all for weeks on end, looking over at it and admiring it, and thinking, God, I wonder what will we sell in that shop now? And you know, and we couldn't make up our minds, you know. And the next thing, we'll rent out the shop and we'll live in the flat overhead, and that's what we've done. The Irish people have basically moved to the flat upstairs, and the corporates moved in, and they're running the building. And we're just tenants, essentially. They've inverted that. And so we need to go back to the drawing board and actually look at our culture, our country, our landscape. Look at all the stuff that's happening now with the EU and the World Economic Forum, and what they're doing to farmers, the culling of cattle, the denaturalization of land, so-called, which is basically decommissioning of land, more set aside, really. So we need to grab that back, because Ireland, in my view, there was two things I was saying 25 years ago in the Irish Times. That number one was that water would be the oil of the 21st century, and we had the best, cleanest water in the world before the corporates came. I mean, a lot of those chemical companies came here on the promise. They were told, they were invited in on the basis that Ireland, because Ireland had a pristine landscape, that they could pollute to their heart's degree and nobody would notice for years. They were mostly on the run from environmental legislation in America and elsewhere. And they call it a natural endowment factor. That's what it's called in the lingo. First of all, the water. The second thing was Ireland could have constructed a genuinely green economy 25 or 30 years ago, where we would have become the organic capital of the world, producing pure vegetables, food, the best of food. We could still do that, but it'll take longer now to get to that point. That we need to restore our land, our soil, our water, which is heavily polluted. The water courses are really damaged. So is the soil. The soil is inert, basically, over most of the land, most of the territory of Ireland. That's a 10 to 15, 20-year project, but we have to undertake it. You see, it's not that it's looking for short-term remedies that has been our disaster. And now so we have to learn how do we bridge that? How are we going to bridge that time span in order to get rid of that booster rocket? See, it was only supposed to be, the foreign direct investment thing, FDI, was only ever supposed to be a booster rocket. I think that was Lamasse's plan, intention, to be fair, and Whitaker. But it became the sole mechanism for survival. And then it became an albatross around our necks. And it is now it's crucifying Ireland in multiple ways. I mean, just consider the fact that these corporations came here on the promise that they were going to employ Irish people. Well, they're not. Absolutely not. 95% of the staff of Google, for example, is non-Irish. They have no interest in. And if you read the Irish Times, they'll tell you it's because Irish people are bad at languages. This is what you get, from your treasonous newspapers. So yes, that is an urgent mission. That takes where are you going to get? Then you have to think back from where would you get the kind of men and women who could sit in offices in government buildings and ring Mr. Google up and tell him, there's a plane leaving at 5 o'clock. I think you should be on it. We need to get to that day as quickly as possible, that we don't need these people. Because apart from actually polluting the literal water courses and of our country, they're also polluting the moral groundwater of our culture. Because they're offering a moral hazard to the world. They come in here and they dodge tax. That's their only product. They're only here because they're dodging tax. And we seem to have no shame about that. In fact, nobody ever mentions it in these terms, but that's what it is. They're tax dodgers. Like we're a criminal nation now on account of this. But if you say this, well, how are we going to, it's like Albert Reynolds one time said to me when I was opposing the Maastricht Treaty. He says, well, have you got 6 billion quid to give me? You know, well, we're just going to have to do without it. Somehow we're going to have to reconstruct our country, because if this goes on, we're going to be destroyed anyway. And we're going to have to accept that fact and say, okay, we're going to destroy us anyway. So can we take charge of that process of taking down what we've become, dismantling it ourselves, and rebuilding it in, say, a 20-year period, and trying to find a way that we can live and keep our people in a decent way in the interim. I think it's not beyond the bounds of possibility if we can redraw our boundaries in terms of material expectation and so on. But that's a huge cultural project, which again, you can't do with a corrupt media. You need a very, very healthy media to undertake a project like that. So you can see all these problems are interlinked, and they all lead back to the first one, which is the conversation needs to be healthy. Without a healthy conversation, you can't even approach the other problems.
We expect you as a future member of European Parliament to fix that also. So thanks for fixing that.
Consider it done.
First, Kieran made a point about that in 1942 there was an act where the Irish gave their right away, probably to the central bank, to print money, I believe, something like that. And then secondly, he said the Japanese have banned the mRNA due to excess deaths. Put that in your pipe.
I had heard rumblings about things in Japan where there was a lot of eyebrows raised there about it, and a lot of awareness, and they're very independent-minded people, you know, the Japanese. So I would, you know, I have been thinking that has to be possible. Just as in a different light, I think it must at some stage happen that some residual ethical muscle within the media must begin to re-engage and start to ask questions about what's being done. So I have some hope in that, but it's a very slow burn, and you know, the pressure, the downward pressure on it from corrupt governments, of course, is immense. The bank thing, yes, I think that that's right, and you know, our fundamental where we are now, the biggest threat to us now comes from banking because of the huge debts that have been incurred and the lack of connectivity between our money systems and human endeavour. You know, that was the whole point of gold, that it tied as a basis of a money system, that it tied the substance of money to into a relationship with the amount of work and effort that it took to achieve anything. And by having that unity, that connectivity, it kept things in balance. And so there have been all of these things to do with banking. And it's very interesting, Kieran, I mean, if you look back at what is called economics for as long as you can remember, they never talked about these things. Economists never talk about these things in these terms. They never talk about banking in terms of its ownership, in terms of its control. They never talk about money in terms of its pure nature. What is money? They just treat money as if it's a kind of a constant, universal phenomenon. And these have been the great undoing of the West in general. I mean, we're on the point actually of the whole thing coming down now. There's a book that came out last year called The Great Taking, which people should really read. It's quite a technical book, but very readable if you give it some time. It's available in PDF form online. The Great Taking by Robert Webb. He describes a situation which is essentially that, since the gold standard, that the money systems have basically accumulated all this debt, the result of which is that the collateral in the system, whatever collateral is in the system, if you have a mortgage, for example, that collateral has been used multiple times in multiple transactions by people who have no connection with your house or your business or your person or your family or anything. And that when the king comes down, that collateral will accrue, the benefit of that collateral will accrue not to the person in the house who's been paying the mortgage and maybe has it 90% paid off, but to the person highest up the chain who has the loudest voice and the most power. And not alone is this is no longer a theoretical thing, they've actually readied up the legal systems of the world to make sure that this will happen. So that people will, when the World Economic Forum say, you know, you will own nothing and you will be happy, what they mean is you will own nothing and we will be happy.
When are the medical industry going to take responsibility?
You see, the best day to always blow the whistle is the first day or the second day, but then there's a diminishing return on that. And the problem is that now, it's harder and harder and harder, more and more inertia and work finds its way into that whole process. And it's harder and harder. And so the instinct then is to double down, double down. This is the way the whole mechanism is constructed, really, to ensure that this happens, that everybody is complicit and therefore is less likely to shout, to start singing. And so I'm not sure where that could come from. Within the profession. It's pretty, monolithic. I mean, I know we've had lots and lots of great doctors and nurses who come out over the, but they were early on by and large. It's very rare, or rare enough now to have people coming out at this stage. And you see, this is the problem, that the whole edifice is unified, it's tied together in its corruption. And they have come to realize that if they just keep repeating their mantras and keep talking about COVID as if it's a real thing, as if it's still there, that will convince people. And you see, it does work. This is the thing, because you see, we weren't even thinking down the years, we haven't been thinking about, how do we receive information, how do we apprehend facts, as it were. We kind of think, well, they're on the media, that's kind of it, like it's either on the news or it's in the paper. That isn't really sufficient understanding for what we now know about that process. Because what we know is, like, there used to be a kind of a saying in journalism that there are 3 rules in journalism. First you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them what you've told them. And that's really very true. Repetition is essential. People need to hear things again and again, and people are picking up all kinds of clues, even unconsciously, about what's real and what's not real. And they're also noticing, without necessarily noticing that they're noticing, that when certain things are left out of the discussion, and they make a conclusion. So when somebody says outside of that process that they're in every day, if somebody says something, there's a kind of an automatic thought, which isn't necessarily articulated, but which is there, that well, that couldn't be true, because it should be on the 9 o'clock news if it was, like, obviously, and it's not, so this guy's mad. And indeed, Joe Duffy was talking about this precise kind of madness only yesterday. Like, it's all built in this way to pseudo-reality, you see. So it's almost impermeable, like you're literally clawing at a cast iron surface that you just literally can't even make a scratch on it. And that's so, they're inside in that cocoon and they're secure. And when people are faced with the risk of punishment, maybe imprisonment, sort of has a kind of a way of overruling their consciences. And all that's going on. And I mean, I've had a couple of experiences of it, even in relatively minor ways, like going in for scans and being thrown out because I wasn't wearing a mask in a hospital, and thinking my consultant was going to kind of, put his foot down, but he didn't. He just threw me to the wolves and disappeared, And so, and the logic there would be, well, just wear the mask. And, I said, no, but just wear the mask and then you won't die. No, I'll die. But that's kind of what it takes in this kind of corrupt culture. You've got to say, well, no, I'll die, if that's what you are insisting upon. If it's a choice between being a slave and dying, I'm going to die. When you look at the skill that those mechanisms were built with the double things that you people got engaged in, because, like, I had a sister who died during the whole COVID thing from cancer, and I'm not saying that there was a connection in any way, who knows, but the fact that I couldn't go to visit her because, I might be accused of, if she suddenly got the COVID or something like it, and then died, that would be my fault. And so I didn't go. And there was no way that I could liberate myself from that without literally just arriving and insisting, which would have been very risky. And so these kind of mechanisms were as though like carefully constructed and then slotted into place in the culture and made to work. in a very sinister way. Because I've gone through all of these things to the best of my ability to try to describe them, these syndromes and these kind of mechanisms and the way they all fit together. Because this has never happened before. If we all die, or whatever happens, if Ireland is wiped off the map, or I'd like to at least have one copy of whatever number of books I can do hidden away, so that in 50 or 100 years somebody will find them and be able to piece this together again. Because this is the worst. I was lying when I said earlier this was only the worst thing in independence or whatever I said. This is the worst thing that's ever happened in history, in human history. It's the most sinister thing, in my view, that's happened in human history.
Call your next book I Told You So. Guys, I think we should wrap this up. But this young man has had his hand up for a while, so let's maybe end on this question, and we can hang around afterwards and you can ask John all the questions you like. I'll give you his phone number and you can ring him at 6 in the morning if you like. What do you think about the idea that COVID was just a test run?
Yeah, that's a possibility. It's complicated because we need to spell out what was COVID, or what do we think COVID was, and I'm not 100% clear on all of the different possibilities. The way I've kind of done this, I talk about my dry stone wall. That I'm building a stone wall and I have all these stones around me, and there's a space, so I try out different ones. But the best kind of sense I have of it is that basically, there may have been 2 or 3 strains of very minor viruses let loose, probably as bioweapons in the West. But mostly it was done by smoke and mirrors, using normal illness and exaggerating and misrepresenting and so on with the corrupt press. But that the jabs were actually the bioweapon. That's my view of that. And so I think that at this point I would say that it had a number of purposes. One was that it was a rehearsal for what I believe is coming, which is the martial law that will be imposed when the money systems come down. Because that's the moment of social turmoil that they're rehearsing for. Because people are not going to take kindly to the idea that they've lost everything they worked for all their lives. That's going to go down rather badly, and that's what's going to happen, and that's one thing. But then we've now this is one of the things about our democracies and our freedoms and all that. That when you start to think this is that, and I hate blackpilling people, but I find it useful myself to run my head around a lot of this stuff. That we're looking at a future unless. I keep saying unless, but what if there are no unlesses? But that if we cannot reverse all this, if we can't, basically get rid of behavioral psychology as an actual practical science, ban it from political and social life, if we can't control the pharmaceutical industry and stop them, in a way that works, if we can't control the American deep state and the Democratic Party, which seems to me to be the 2 most sinister forces on the planet right now. And that if we can't actually there's no point in talking about democracy unless we can actually deal with these problems, because we are in the future. And also reclaim the ownership of technology from Silicon Valley and all these guys. We have to take it back from them. The post-humanist thing has got to be in a democratic, in the grip of democracies. It has to be run by the people and their people's honest representatives, if you can imagine such a thing. So, we're in big trouble. We're in the worst trouble ever. Yeah. But the most important thing is that we know each other. That's why even to have these conversations is vital, that we can do this. And this again brings us back to what's at stake when people think it's just some far-righters talking among themselves. No, we're trying to talk in a way that we can teach each other and share the knowledge that whether we've heard it or put it together ourselves. That's very important, because I'm not sitting up here saying I know everything. I don't. My dry stone wall is still only half finished, you know. And I'm scared to think of what it might look like when it's finished, you know. But yeah, that's these issues are, these powers that they have now have got to fall into the democratic ownership. If you look back again at history, at the recent history, it seems to me to be obvious now that all that stuff we went through in the 80s and 90s in Ireland and the Celtic Tiger and all that was just distraction. Back in the mid-80s, we were doing articles about the future of work and topics like that, technology and the impact it was going to have. And then everybody just got rich, and that discussion disappeared. Nobody started talking about that at all. And I mean, the way people got rich was they just made more and more fake money and plateaued out people's incomes, but gave them loads of loans at cheaper interest rates, so they felt much richer than they had been, so they had a car in the drive and so on. And maybe they could afford a mortgage, for certainly back in the 90s it was easier, when the interest rates came down. But the result was that while all this was going on, these guys in Silicon Valley were readying the whole thing up, not just technologically, but in terms of ownership. So then they came out about 2016 and said, well, now we're ready to tell you what the deal is. And the deal is that you just keep your mouth shut and we'll tell you what your life's going to be like and your children's life, what it's going to be like. And that's kind of what's happening. And when you actually listen to the media line on this, there's nobody saying that. There's nobody outraged about that. Like the journalists I grew up with when I was a kid, you starting up in Dublin years ago, or Hot Press, you'd be jumping up and down in the International Bar or somewhere, you know, about the outrage of this. The idea that Henry Kissinger was basically at the top of all this technological revolution, and was that a good thing? You know, nobody seems to even ask these questions anymore. I mean, I had a conversation there recently with a person who lives not far from here, who is probably the most eminent journalist of his generation, if not several generations of recent times, and I kind of, we have had a sort of a speckled relationship in terms of, I worked for him quite a few times and we fell out and battered each other loads of times. But I had a huge respect for him. But I had a conversation with him recently where, you know, we're talking about this. You know, he just run into him and he started talking about past, Charlie Haughey, whatever. But you get into like the problem of the world, and I was kind of sort of trying to tell him something like this stuff, you know, beginning to, or test him out to see, did he know, how much did he know? So he kind of picked up on this idea, well, what's wrong with the world? And he started giving me this guff about, oh, what's wrong with the politics, what's wrong with Ireland now, he says, is that we don't really have the right kind of form of government because we don't have a mechanism whereby experts can become ministers. And really we should just have politicians being elected but not becoming ministers, and then they appoint experts as ministers. That would be the... And I just looked at him and I said, and you think that's what's wrong with the country? Like, I couldn't believe it. And then I said, I started talking about supranational organisation, and I mentioned the World Economic Forum. World Economic Forum, WEF, spell it backwards. What does it spell? F-E-W. It's the organisation of the few, not the many. And I said to the World Economic Forum, and he said, they have no power. Like that's how out of touch. And this guy was the sharpest tack in the box by a long stretch for years. He was the guy, and you know what I'm talking about, he was the guy who was in the press conference shouting up at whoever it was, giving them a hard time, making them squirm for years and years and years. And he's gone. He has no clue. That's the effect of the pseudo-reality. That's how powerful it is.
Could be a vax injury as well. Sean, I think we should wrap it up, guys. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
And thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for your compassion and your heart. And thanks for standing up and doing the election thing. Fair play to you. John Waters.